Okay, we've got a few journalists who have joined us, but we're going to wait a few minutes. The Boxcast stream is live, so the media that have that direct link, you should be able to record off of that if you need to. And we'll leave that up for a couple days. This broadcast is not on our social channels, just for the media. I was going to explain that we usually don't do it this way, but very few of the reporters on this call did it the old way. But we used to have individual 15-minute sessions where we'd invite journalists to meet with the city manager and go over the budget. And that format was kind of rushed. You had 15 minutes, you had to get it all done. And I think in many ways, this works out a little better. Got a few more people who signed up in advance. Want to give them a chance to join us. Okay. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Good afternoon. My name is Brian Wheeler, Director of Communications for the City of Charlottesville. We've scheduled this virtual press conference to allow you, our local media partners, to receive information related to the city's fiscal year 2022 budget in advance of the formal presentation before Charlottesville City Council at their meeting, which begins at 6:30 tonight. However, the budget presentation is late in the meeting, so we want to make sure you had an opportunity to get any pressing questions addressed. There will be numerous budget work sessions, so we know you will have additional questions as the process continues. The next budget work session will be this Thursday at 4 p.m. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our new city manager, Mr. Chip Boyles, who will make some brief remarks, and also on the call are our senior budget and management analyst, Ryan Davidson and Chrissy Hamill. Afterwards, this group will take questions from the credentialed media on the webinar. And if you ask something that needs some more digging on our part, we'll note it and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Mr. Boyles, and I'll bring up the slides.
Thank you. And I want to thank you all for joining us today for this preview and discussion of the city manager's fiscal year 22 budget. This is the proposal to the Charlottesville City Council that will be occurring this evening. With only 2 weeks of work in as the city manager, I'm not able to take any of the credit really for the work and care that was put into this budget by our staff members from across the city, and especially to our budget office that's joining us here today. It goes without saying that this has been an extremely difficult year to prepare a budget. Known decreased revenues in the current year and unknown revenue and expense projections for fiscal year 22 make this a difficult task at best. Staff has taken a very conservative approach to go into FY22 and is hoping for the best as we begin to move out of this pandemic that we're in. We anticipate a number of budget amendments throughout the year as revenue sources such as BPOL and sales taxes stabilize and as federal assistance hopefully materializes. Here are a few highlights of the budget to note. for today. The total general fund budget of just over $190 million represents a roughly minus 0.26%, less than 1% decrease from the FY21 budget. City departments for this budget submitted a total of $89.8 million in budget requests for FY22. 4.9 million of these requests were new to the budget, but none of which could be recommended for funding in the general fund. The only new request included in the FY22 proposed budget was for additional Charlottesville area transit personnel, which had no effect on the general fund. These were funds that will be funded through federal CARES Act money. The budget also includes $6.5 million for FY22 and over $38.5 million in the 5-year capital program for several affordable housing initiatives, including redevelopment of public housing, housing rehab, supplemental rental assistance, and Friendship Court redevelopment. One thing you'll note in this budget that no pay increases are currently included for employees. However, active employees who are covered by the city's health care will receive a 1-month premium holiday, and some employees will see reductions in that monthly premium. Staff has expectations that certain revenue projections may improve in the coming weeks during the budget discussions, and I have recommended to the City Council that the first consideration for any of these improved financial conditions should be considered for salary reinvestment into our employees. Also tonight, at the school board's request, no new dollars are being allocated for operations. FY22 operational increases are being offset by one-time use of federal CARES funds. These federal CARES funds, while would not result in any increases for the current year, we would see a roughly $4.5 million increase to the general fund for future years. Finally, for FY22, the Vibrant Community Fund process adopted 6 broad funding priority areas. These included education and youth, jobs and wages, community and public safety, affordable housing, equity, and health. As was the same case in FY21, the Vibrant Community Fund review process resulted in numerous shifts in both the number of agencies and the programs to be funded. Overall, the pool of funds for these agencies for FY22 was just over $2.2 million, which was level funded again FY21. But not everything looks dark. We have had more than 37,000 jobs in our city. Unemployment is shrinking, and 2020 and 2021 will see major commercial investment and reinvestment. Unfortunately for us right now, though, retail vacancy rates are higher now than in any recent years. As said, these are the highlights of the proposed budget. There we go. And during the development of this budget, staff focused on the strategic plan themes of affordable housing, preserving and enhancing quality services, investing in our employees, supporting our schools, maintaining an efficient and effective organization, and always meeting the council's priorities. All decisions were made with these principles in mind. The budget will be presented to the mayor and city council tonight and will be joined by the Charlottesville City Schools at the same time. After tonight, the council and community will have several opportunities for discussion and revisions in the coming months, with an expected approval of the final budget scheduled for April 13th. We look forward to a robust discussion and hope that as the year progresses, more favorable financial conditions come about. Copies of the proposed budget are expected to be available at open library branches beginning Thursday. And now Chrissy Hamill and Ryan Davidson from the Budget Office are here to answer your specific questions that you might have about the budget. And thank you all again.
Thank you, Mr. Boyles. And for the media who would like to ask a question, we've got time to just cycle through a couple times here. So if you want to raise your hand, we will just go in the order in which you raise them. First up is Catherine Knott from the Daily Progress. Catherine, go ahead.
Fabulous. So the budget letter that you wrote, Chip, mentions that you provide substantial investment in the services that residents, businesses, and visitors have come to expect from the city, but still make some reasonable choices and changes in service levels as you guys can kind of continue to look at efficiencies. What were some of those choices that you guys had to make, and what are the changes in service levels that we're looking at?
And Catherine, if it's okay, I'm gonna pass on to both Chrissy and Ryan. Again, the lion's share of this work was completed by the time I got in, and they can probably provide the details much better than I can. Thank you.
So I'll just say we did not consider any service changes or service delivery changes for this budget. In most budgets, we're able to add some, and we always have a slide where we can say that these are some efficiencies and things that we're adding. Because departments were basically asked to submit level budgets, there's not a lot of new this year. So I think that's more the point of that statement.
Okay, cool. This is my first time really looking at your guys' budget, since I'm usually looking at the schools. So I was trying to be like, that sounds interesting. So I don't.
No, we actually were just talking about this slide for tonight. So you beat us to it.
And Mr. Boyles was going through a few points he'll make to council tonight. So we didn't want to give you the whole slide deck, save a little bit for later. Catherine, I'm going to put you on pause here, and then you can come back if you need to. Up next, Sean Tubbs. Sean, go ahead.
Here. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to go straight to capital stuff, if that's okay. Because it looks like some decisions were made after the last work session. It looks like, and I guess looking for confirmation too, staff recommended 1 million for the Market Street and then 7 million for next year. Let's just stick with that one for now. Can you just address how that decision was made for this recommended budget?
Sure. So after the meeting with the Planning Commission and through some recommendations, also meeting with staff, there are a lot of questions still to be answered. There have been some options that have been thrown out for things to look at. And so rather than defer the entire amount, we decided to leave a small amount to give staff an opportunity to do some further research. And we left the other dollars out in the future years as more of a placeholder, because we've been talking about the CIP reaching full capacity. And so we didn't want to take those out totally until the final decision is made. And so we've pushed those out to the majority of those dollars out to 23 to give time to look at the options and figure out what are the best next steps.
Sean, anything else?
Oh, I got plenty, but if you want to cycle through some others. Although a follow-up on that one, so Chris Engel has said that we're coming up against a deadline, for when the request for proposals would need to go out for this project. Does this give enough to push the decision back for a year, or do you all think you can make the at least what's stated in the agreement with the county with this move?
So because this is a bond funded project, we have lots, as long as we're leaving the dollars in until a final decision is made, we always have the flexibility to reshuffle those amounts. I would say that the dollar amount that's put in here now, it gives us enough time and gives staff the flexibility to continue doing that research with some funding available. But, as of this point, and Chip can correct me if I'm wrong here, we're still working under the notion that we have to comply with the agreement and to meet those deadlines. And once plans and things are more firmed up, then if we need to shuffle some money back to 22, we can. But even in the original plans, I don't think any construction was due to start until April or May. So in the spirit of saying, hey, we heard you, and that we are reconsidering, we did shuffle some of the dollars to 23.
Thanks.
And Sean, I can follow up with what Chrissy said, was that the city council has been very, very clear that the intention is to meet the options that are given in the MOU of providing the parking to the Albemarle County for the courts. There were a couple of different options, and all of the discussion have been that we intend to meet the MOU requirements.
Next up, we have Andrew Webb from NBC 29. Andrew, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. My question is, this budget kind of has a creation for a new deputy city manager for race, equity, and inclusion. Why is that important, and what will that role kind of look like?
Well, it's important, number one, because we do want to make sure that all of our Charlottesville community is included in everything that we do, in our decision-making process and our housing, in everything that we do. And this is a role, and following with many other local governments and governmental organizations around us that have prioritized this effort to a very high-ranking position within the local government organizations. The mayor and city council have been very, very clear that this is a priority for us in our strategic planning and looking forward, not only as a community, but also as an organization. And placing this position within the city manager's office will help to elevate that to the role that it's projected. Here with Charlottesville, not only will they be working just on the race, equity, inclusion, and diversity, but will also will be directly overseeing several of our departments, including health services, social services, and other community type services.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Next up, Charlotte Woods from Charlottesville Tomorrow. Charlotte, go ahead.
Hi. For a second, I almost thought Andrew was asking specifically what I was asking. It is related. I do see that there's a note about funding in fiscal year 2022 for this deputy manager for race, equity, diversity, inclusion. How much funding is slotted for that? And forgive me if I couldn't seem to find it in the budget. I might have skimmed over. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we can answer that.
Sure. Give me 1 second here. Specifically for that position, sorry, I'm trying to find the exact. So it is approximately $225,000 between salary, benefits, and incidentals for that position.
All right. Thank you so much. I could not. Do you know what page that's on?
I was pulling from a spreadsheet because those are easier for me to search through. I can look and let you know, but I believe we mentioned it on page, it's in section B, I believe. Is that correct, Chrissy?
I think so. It's in one of the we can get Brian to send that to you, but it's in one of the sections where we're highlighting the strategic priorities, either in the city manager's letter or in B.
Yeah, it's in one of those sections.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, we have Brielle from Seville Weekly.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
We can.
Awesome. All right, well, I just have a few questions. My first one is for Mr. Boyles. So obviously, Mr. Boyles, you haven't been here for that long yet. So I was just wondering, in the short time you've been able to take on your position, do you feel like you've had a chance to make a meaningful impact or give meaningful input on the budget?
Well, as I said earlier, most of the heavy lifting had occurred by the time I started 2 weeks ago. But I do feel that all of my comments and suggestions and some direction even has been very well received with our budget office and with our department heads. So yes, I feel like I've been able to contribute a little bit But most of the work had occurred much prior to me getting here.
Okay, cool. And then my next question. So I noticed there's been a slight budget increase for the Office of Human Rights. And as you all may know, the commission has been asking for a little while now for a new director. So does that budget increase indicate there will be a new director hired soon?
So for the Office of Human Rights, in looking at their particular budget, the director's position is included in that budget. I don't believe the slight increase was directly related to that. There was some other contractual costs, I believe, that led to that. Plus, as we stated, one of the things that we are dealing with in this current budget was that while we haven't given any pay raises in FY21 or FY22, there was a 4% pay raise that was included in FY20 that had to be distributed out to the departments because it was in the employee compensation pool. So some of the, if you look at the particular salary and benefits lines for certain departments, for most departments, you'll see an increase there, but that is not related to any current pay raise. That is just distributing out the prior pay raises from prior years to the appropriate areas in the appropriate departments.
Okay.
And just to add on to that, when Charlene Green left the city, that's an example of where, her position as executive director was fully funded. And when it's vacant, that is one of the things that contributes to fund balance at the end of a year. So if we have employee positions that are budgeted and then they're not filled, that's one way we get fund balance. But it would, the position never went away. It just has yet to be filled.
And I can say that position, as well as a number of other leadership positions, are waiting to be filled, and we anticipate that advertisements for several positions will be out the beginning of next week. So those will likely be filled in the current fiscal year.
Okay, awesome. Sorry, just writing down the last part.
That's okay. And nobody else has their hand up, so if you want to ask another, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. I just had one more question, which is kind of long, but as you all know, there's been increasing demands across the community since really last year with the rise of the uprising of the Black Lives Matter movement. There's been more demands for the city to reduce the police department's budget and allocate more money towards like education, social services, etc. But this budget has a slight increase, $900,000, I believe, to the police department's budget. So I was just wondering, what was the budget process behind that, and if the city was, considering listening to some community members' demands and reducing the budget, CPD budget.
Yeah, so I can address that. So the police department's budget for FY22 is basically level to the FY21 budget. They did have one real increase in that the contractual contract for the body-worn cameras was previously paid from some existing CIP funds. That has been moved to their operating budget. That contract also was renegotiated. And so that makes up, that is the only increase that's on the other expenditure side, which is about 190 or 187,000, I believe. The additional, which shows as a salary increase, is not a real salary increase. There were no salary increases for 21 or 22. What happened is when we produce a budget, one of the things that's a conversation every year is whether or not we will add a new merit or any type of pay increase for employees. And so because that is part of the process and it's a new ad, we basically budget those merits in a lump sum, which shows up in the employee comp and benefits section. In FY20, the police department and all departments received a 4.17% pay increase. And when we presented a the first proposal budget pre-COVID to council, that pay increase was then reflected in departmental budgets. When COVID hit and we had to go back and essentially do a brand new proposed budget, the decision was made that we were going to basically just move forward with the FY20 budget as level. And so in doing that, we went back to a budget that showed salaries for every department at their FY20 level, with the merit as a lump sum rather than divvying it back out to departments. And the reason we did that was because when we talked about a level budget, we didn't want to have every department showing an increase like is what you see in this year's budget document. So the increase that you see under salaries for the police department is essentially just a catch up of accounting to divvy up the merits that were given in FY20. And in fact, the salaries for the police department, we unfunded 2 police officer positions this year to balance the 2022 budget. And that was at a cost savings of about $178,000. So again, to sort of summarize, the only increase that is reflected in the police department budget is just, again, somewhat of a accounting issue, because the body worn cameras were previously paid out of the CIP, and that's been moved to their operating budget. And there was a slight increase there, but that's they essentially have a flat budget.
Okay.
And I think another thing to add would be that some of that conversation, Brielle, that you're referring to has moved to council's level, where they have convened, a task force to give them advice from the community as to how we might have a different approach down the road. So I think, this budget reflects staff's recommendations to council at this juncture. Certainly, they can make decisions as we get into the budget process, and whether it's this year or next year to reshape that.
Thanks.
All right, next we're going to go to Sean Tubbs again. Sean, you're back on with
Hello again.
City Manager.
Okay, more capital. So let's move on to the other big project. I noticed that, we had a couple months where you didn't really get a lot of clear direction from council, but it appears that this is reflected. It looks like the original proposal to include no more additional funding in the West Main Streetscape project is there. I also noticed that there's no further outlays in the out years either. Is that something you feel confident that council has made that decision, or is that something that's going to come up during the work sessions?
I hope that it will come up during the work session. It's one of those things that we had the work sessions with council to tee off a conversation about West Main and where they wanted to go. And so as part of a staff recommendation, just from an affordability standpoint, as we've talked about in those presentations, we took out any additional funding for West Main and added the school reconfiguration project. Absent some real solid direction from council, we have not made any changes in the CIP. We've not changed our position there in hopes that once we get to these work sessions as part of the budget, then there will be some decisions made.
Gotcha. Not to belabor the point, because we've talked about West Main a lot. I seem to recall that wasn't there, and this might have been last year's CIP, but wasn't there at one point a bypass fire station project that was in there? I didn't see this listed. Was that taken out this year, or was that last year?
It was in the CIP last year. It's still in there. It's just there's no new money. So that project has been fully funded through prior CIPs. And since the budget just looks at 22 and forward, there's no additional money added, but the project is still funded.
Thanks.
Catherine, you're back on.
Well, I have 2 questions if you stick with me. One was about the kind of the range of things that were mentioned under balancing the budget, that was kind of like different positions that were reclassified, added, or unfunded in FY22. Are those kind of things that you guys are putting on the burner, like you kind of hope to bring back these positions? Are they gone? Are they dead? What?
So they
Yes.
are still in the budget. We just looked for positions that either were vacant or we expected to be vacant, and use that funding to help balance the budget, the shortfall in 22. But they're still, those positions are still available in the departments and should be, you know, budget provided, should be put back for funding in 23.
Cool. And can you guys kind of give any more insight into the 4.9 million in new requests that were not funded in this, just so I kind of get a sense of what you guys couldn't do this year?
Yes. So with the new request, there was a wide range of things from digitizing of records to additional personnel. There was a lot of additional personnel requests that were being asked for. And I think one thing we should clarify is that 4.9 million, that included both the general fund, which are our tax supported departments, and the non-general funds like social services department, transit, the fleet departments, those kind of areas. So that number is total of all funds, not just the general fund, not just tax supported dollars. So it was, I mean, it really was all over, you know, it was a wide range of requests. The majority were for personnel, additional personnel and additional staff, but there was requests for increase in the equipment replacement funding, increase in some computer management systems and some software systems that are kind of more one-time capital type asks that will be considered in other ways, and things like that.
Definitely. Thanks, guys.
You're welcome. All right, Charlotte Woods, you're back on.
How many more budget work sessions can we expect until the budget is adopted?
So we have pretty much for the next 6 weeks, we have at least 1 to 2 public council meetings related to the budget. They're not all work sessions. I believe we have 4 work sessions scheduled, 1 community budget forum, and 2 public and the presentation tonight, and then 2 other public hearings on the budget. So there's I can't countless opportunities for the public and council to weigh in on the budget between now and our adoption date is April 13th, I believe.
Mhm.
And just for everyone's expectations, you know, tonight is a presentation and the superintendent will present the school division budget, but we're not expecting a lot of discussion by council about either of them at this point. They certainly can if they want to, but the intent is to go into the next budget work session and really start the conversation on Thursday.
And I just wanted to point out that on our budget webpage, charlottesville.gov budget/budget, we do have a document that has all of the upcoming budget related public meetings for the rest of the budget season. So the exact number, you can find the exact date, times, and number of opportunities on that document.
Looking at it now. Thank you.
Anything else, Charlotte?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Sean Tubbs.
Hey, this time operating, I swear. I noticed in the budget write-up, hold on, let me get over to that tab. I noticed that you, in the line item for recreation income, there's a statement that says that the city anticipates opening up pools and rec centers. Actually, I think it just says facilities in the future. Is that anticipating on July 1st for an open date, or how will that conversation come about if we need to stay in some of these restrictions for longer?
So the figures we put together in the recreation budget were based on opening a certain level of openness, I should say, by July 1st. However, that is still, we had to find an area to, or excuse me, find a date to work these projections from. And as you've seen in previous council meetings, there's still a lot of discussion about what types of recreation facilities and the timing to open all of that up. So I'm sure there will be plenty of future discussion around the opening of those types of facilities as we move forward through the pandemic. And so it's hard to say exactly how many, like, if we weren't saying, oh, we're going to have 5 pools open and 3 rec centers, that's still a moving target at this point, but we needed to have a projection or a deadline for the departments to work their projections off from. And, as you've seen in the current year with the revenues, as things change, we've come back to council and given them those adjusted figures. So should the openings be delayed or not happen, then we would come back in with potential revisions to that. But especially on the Parks and Recreation side, that's one where if we're not opening the facilities, we're also seeing expenditure savings. So those, we would hope that those would at least offset, and that would be discussions we would have as we work with council as to when to move forward with some of this.
Thanks. And going back just because talking about a specific one, this is a follow-up technically. There's also the funding for the Smith Aquatic Center ventilation system. I believe that money has been spent and that's done, correct?
I don't think it's
Well,
done.
the project isn't done, but in terms of the budget, it's done, I meant.
Correct. Yeah. It was funded last year.
That's what, thanks. I'm staring at it from my house, so it's literally right there. So.
Thank you, Sean. Catherine Knott, go ahead.
So continuing along the theme of me learning about the budget as I go, what was the shortfall kind of figure you guys were looking at? I know you kind of have a range of projections that you've been using at different council meetings. Was there like a figure you kind of had to balance? I don't know if that's the right way to phrase that.
I understand what you're asking. So every year as we start the budget process, we're looking at our revenues and we ask for the departmental requests. And there's always a gap. We always start with a budget gap. That's the term we refer to. Instead of a shortfall, we call it a budget gap at the beginning of the year. And as we continue to refine our revenue estimates and we go through and we look at the departmental requests, we eventually close that gap down to balance the budget, close that gap down to 0. So when we came to, I believe the first time we talked to council about a gap was at the beginning of February 3rd work session, I believe. And we were discussing a potential $4.5 million gap. Now that was based upon, like I said, our initial FY22 revenue projections and the original submissions from the departments. And as we go through, we will find areas that are just administratively need to be cleaned up that could remove some things. And then there may be new requests that are added into that, accidentally added into the budget or inadvertently added into their operational budgets that we need to change and move. And then as you were asking, or someone was asking previously about some of those changes and reductions that we make as we go through the budget, all those combine, make the sausage, so to speak, and then shrink that gap down to 0 by the time we present it to council.
Definitely. And then I noticed under the other changes kind of summary, there's looks like a 6.6 million decrease in the citywide reserve. What happened there? My very technical question.
We set that up last year in response to COVID for FY21, because we still are unsure. Numbers are changing all the time, but they were really changing when we adopted the budget last year. We deferred all cash funded projects in the CIP and instead put that money in the general fund in that economic downturn reserve to help offset any potential impacts from COVID. So as Ryan has been reporting to council on a monthly basis with the monthly reports, that was actually a good play on our part. We have blown through all of that in order to balance 21 at this point, and are potentially having to look, at what was the last number, Ryan? 9 point something, 8 point something?
9, just shy of 10 million. It was 9.9 projected gap, and we come back to. We'll be coming back to council in about a month with a revised figure, because we come back with revised projections each quarter for council, because as Chrissy said, things are changing so quickly right now that if we came back every month, things would swing so wildly that they would never be able to catch up. So that's where
you're talking, and that gap is for this fiscal year. Sometimes I forget we're still in one fiscal year that you guys were trying to manage through.
Okay. Yeah, but
and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah. So that the 6 million number, the 9 million number, both refer to fiscal year 21. And then I think what the budget team, and Chip has been involved in many of these meetings even before he officially started, looking at the revenue gaps. And what the budget team has to do then is look through the operational budget and find places where there can be savings. At the end of the day, the number we had to balance to was a number that was less than last year's budget.
Definitely. Thanks, guys, for sticking with me there.
And Chrissy, did I leave anything out?
No,
that you
I was
wanted to
just
add?
going to say, to the point, we don't have any kind of reserve similar to that budgeted for 22. So, you know, there's no, the reserve that was set up in 21 was a fallback for a lot of unknowns. This 22 budget has a little bit more of an optimistic outlook, in that we do not have a reserve set aside, and all of that cash is now going back to the CIP to help fund cash projects.
And wanted to build on that point that Chrissy made about not having that economic reserve. I know there had been several counselors that had asked about that as well. And one of the things, one of the reasons we built that in is because when we passed the budget last year, we were less than 4 months into this pandemic. And now we're, you know, over a year into the pandemic, and we have a lot more revenue data and even expenditure data on the trends and what we can expect in these areas. So last year there was a huge deal of uncertainty when we came into those numbers. And I'm not going to say that we're 100% sure on every single revenue number we have, because there's no year we're ever 100% sure. But we just feel with the data that we've collected to this point, we're a lot more confident in those figures that we're providing on the revenue side. So the need for such a large reserve, we didn't think was as great as it was in May and June when we came with the revised proposed budget for council last year.
Awesome. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Catherine. Next up, Max Marcilla from NBC 29. Go ahead, Max.
Hey everyone. So you actually just answered one of my questions, so I'm going to kind of tweak it. I was going to ask about the revenue projections, but to kind of get a different perspective on that, how could you, kind of describe, where you thought revenue may be at this point, sort of at the beginning of the pandemic or earlier stages versus, what you have? How have you kind of gauged those revenue projections? Has it surpassed expectations? I know some people have said so. So just your thoughts on that.
Sure. In terms of the revenue projections, we have a team of people that meet on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. Several times a month we'll meet. That gets together, includes our treasurer, our commissioner of revenue, economic development, personnel, budget staff, the city manager, large group of people. I know I'm leaving people out within that group, finance department. And we look at every piece of data we can when it comes in, as far as looking at past year collections, comparing the percentages from year to year. And there's just been, overall, there is an expectation from staff that fiscal year 22 will be, I guess, better in terms of revenue than fiscal year 21. And if you look at our revised, the latest revised forecast versus the proposed budget, there is an increase in the revenue from that. It's a decrease from the adopted, but an increase from the revised. And there's still, as we're going through, there's still a lot of unknowns, because each month we're getting in new data on sales, meals, lodging. There's a couple of really large revenue items, such as business licenses that were just due today. Today was the due date for those. So being able to predict collections on something like that has been a little more challenging. We expect, there to potentially hopefully be good news on that, but it's still too early to tell on some of those revenues like that. Tax on bank stock is another one, that comes in around this time of year that we have to wait. We anticipate not a lot of swings in those, but those are the ones that we're looking at. And again, most recent data is showing, we showed a big decline in 1 month, and then it started climbing back up again and was exceeding our expectations. So it's been a long process, and we've been looking at every data point, whether that be information from the state, from the feds, just our own percentages and collection spreadsheets that have helped us to refine these estimates and become more comfortable with predicting in an unpredictable environment.
Thank you. And then one other somewhat unrelated question. As the Senate starts to take up the COVID relief bill, I'm wondering, if they pass that, there will be, at least as it's proposed now, some assistance for local governments and communities. I'm wondering if that would have any impact on this budget or how that could impact the planning for the upcoming year.
Yeah, so it would have the potential to have an impact on the 22 budget, depending on when it's passed and, excuse me, when those funds may be received. It could also potentially impact the current year budget. We have taken a more conservative approach with this budget, and we've not counted any of that for either our 21 projections or 22. So should we get those funds, those would require further conversations with council in order to figure out how best to use those.
All right, that's it for me. Thank you all.
Thank you, Max. And there will be a number of slides, Max, in tonight's presentation on the different revenue trends. So for the 11 o'clock news, you'll have that. Sean, go ahead.
Okay. Final question. Well, actually, maybe one more if there's an opportunity, but kind of continuing on with that, obviously in your projections, you're showing declines, or at least you're not anticipating as much in meals tax and revenue. I'm sorry, meals tax and lodging revenue. Can you just explain how you came up with those numbers? And is it possible, and are you looking ahead at projections for how the tourism trade might potentially begin to rebound and et cetera?
Sure. When we're looking at those particular revenues, one of the things we look at is where our percent of collection as compared to prior years. And so with what's made this difficult is, you have to go all the way back to fiscal year 19 or calendar year 19, calendar year 20, fiscal year 19 to be able to base those projections, because we were in COVID for a great deal of fiscal year 20. So we look back and we see, we're at 60, as an example, we're at 50% of these collections, and we're seeing it climb roughly 3 to 4% a month. And so we extrapolate out on that, and we know what our prior year's collections were, and we look at that and get, this is getting a little into the weeds, but then we're able to come up with a more exact figure on where we think we're going to finish the end of the year. Some of these revenues, as we said, as for the two examples you gave, for lodging and meals, neither of those do we see getting back to 100% of pre-COVID collection rates before the end of this fiscal year, hopefully, or for the end of fiscal year 22. Hopefully we'll be wrong and things will rebound. And if they do that, that's great. It's better than the alternative. So, we try to be conservative in our revenue projections, but because it's, as we said, we don't have that additional reserve, but we also didn't want to be overly conservative. So we felt like we hit that balance between the two of being conservative to give ourselves a little bit of potential cushion with these revenues, but also not selling ourselves short where we're having to look at massive cuts within that budget to be able to balance a ultra conservative revenue projection.
And I would just add along those same lines that, a lot of these revenues, the thing that makes them the most difficult to project is that they're very dependent on consumer behavior. And so a lot of what this team has done is more than ever before. We've looked at trends and how these revenues are interconnected and what that means. And so, if there's try to look for all the things positive about COVID, I do think that we have spent a lot of time looking at our revenues in a little more depth than probably we have ever. And it will be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Thanks.
All right, well, let's wrap it up there. And Chip, do you have any final thoughts you want to share?
No, just thank you all. We appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with us today, letting the folks in the know answer your questions for you. We look forward to seeing you tonight, where more detail will be provided, and even more so in the discussions in the coming weeks. It's going to be a unique fiscal year budget discussion. But also, I believe it will be one that will have as much community engagement, especially through the virtual methods, than ever before. But just thanks everyone.
And feel free to reach out to all of us as we go through the budget process. Let us know if there's a piece of information that you need, and we will get it to you. Thank you for participating today, and we hope you have a good evening as you join us at City Council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.